Through brutal betrayal, rose an army, fighting for a world where no soul suffers in silence. From the group that brought you Desmond's Law, join us as we shield every paw from cruelty. Welcome to the Desmond's Army podcast, Animal Advocacy Unleashed.
All right, welcome everybody. This is episode 8 of the Desmond's Army podcast. I'm your host, Matt Caron, and I'm joined, as always, by our president and co-founder, Zilla Cannamela. Zilla, it's always great to see you.
Great to see you, Matt.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about today's episode. Of course, we're going to introduce the guest in just a few minutes, but first we want to do some housekeeping items and tell everybody what Desmond's Army has been up to, because I think it's been almost a month since we dropped our last podcast. Since then, we have had our Desmond's Legacy event at Cadillac Ranch, which was, I don't know, we were both there, massive success, right, Zilla?
Yeah, it was great. It was great. I'd like to thank everybody who came out and supported us, and I hope you had a great time. We had a great time. We're going to have the same band next year. Shutdown is already committed.
They were great.
And we've already booked for, I believe it's April 4th next year.
That's awesome. Yeah, so much fun. I'm talking to everybody, and all those raffle baskets were amazing. And
you won one.
Yeah, I did. It was, and I won, I think it was some bourbon, which is always good, and Desmond's Army etched highball glasses.
Yes.
Which I think Tina made.
Tina actually made those, yeah.
Yeah, so impressive.
She did those
so
herself.
Yeah, had a lot of fun. We'll do it again next year. And also a few other housekeeping items. We want to tell people, if you've been following our pages, we've been really pushing hard for our bill to expand Desmond's Law to include all companion animals. And we've had some, I would say, more success this session than in past sessions, right, Zilla? But ultimately the bill was killed. Do you want to update people on that?
Yeah, the bill never made it out of judiciary. So, we just hit it again next year. And next year, I would like to see it as a standalone bill as opposed to going in, on an aircraft carrier, so to speak.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. There were a lot of other things in that bill that probably made it a little bit harder to pass, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, it never made it out of committee, which is not unusual. A lot of this is a shorter session, and for time purposes, sometimes bills just don't get on the calendar and other bills get prioritized. But all we can do is keep plugging along, keep raising our voices and advocating and contacting your legislators. The work does not end. And we'll be back again next year and even stronger. So I feel optimistic.
This year we made it farther than we have in the past years. So next year it's going through.
Yep, that's all there is to it. Absolutely. And one more update before we get into the meat and potatoes here of our podcast. Mike Gurchie, right? Mr. Fitness, who we've been dropping stories about on our social media page, was arrested. You want to tell people about that?
He had a court date yesterday as well. So he had to be in Connecticut. And after that court date, I guess in the evening, he was picked up on a violation of probation. He has a no possession order from the court to not have animals. And he had his 2 dogs with him. So they were confiscated. And those 2 dogs are now safe.
Okay. Thor and Stitch were the names of the 2
Thor
dogs.
and Stitch are now safe.
Do we know where they are?
Mr. Gurchie is sitting in jail.
That's the most important thing. Where are the dogs? Do we know?
Undisclosed location.
Gotcha.
But they are safe. I was able to verify that.
Yep. So, I mean, he's got a lot of pending charges. It's not just this case with his dogs. If you look him up, he's got a lot of cases that he's dealing with. So good news that the dogs are safe. And of course, we will continue to be in court for all of his hearings and proceedings and following that closely. But
there was also another arraignment today in the case of Winter, the Wolcott dog who was found deceased in Wolcott, starved to death and frozen. There was an arrest in that case, and his arraignment is this morning.
Wow. Okay. All right. So we'll update people on that. I'll get some information offline with you about that, Z. So episode 8, welcome to the Desmond's Army podcast, all things animal advocacy. Remember, if you have any feedback on our program, feel free to email us at desmondspodcast@gmail.com. That's desmondspodcast@gmail.com. We are soliciting your feedback. What do you like? What do you don't like? Questions that you have. What do you want us to talk about? We look at that, we check that, and we try and adjust the show as we go. We're on all streaming platforms, wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. And today we are going to be talking with an author, Connecticut-based author and social worker who put out a really amazing book that we're going to dive into. Z, do you want to set this up a little bit? Talk about Jackie?
Jackie Ford she's worked for the state for many, many years, and she actually helped and developed the cross-reporting law in Connecticut, which was another first of its kind. She's written a children's book.
It's called The Courage to Tell.
Yes, and it's regarding children and animal cruelty and how they come to handle it.
So, yes, I'll just read a little bit about her bio so everybody knows. So Jackie Ford, as I mentioned, is a Connecticut-based social worker, an adjunct professor, and nationally recognized child advocate. And as Zilla mentioned, she's just released her new children's book, The Courage to Tell, which is available now on Amazon. This is a resource for teachers, social workers, law enforcement, animal control officers, and caregivers. And of course, this is super important to do because April is both Child Abuse Prevention Month and Animal Cruelty Awareness Month. And one of our missions is to talk about the link between those two things. So Jackie has 3 decades of experience in child welfare, and she has her bachelor's degree in psychology from Quinnipiac University and a master's degree in social work from Southern Connecticut State University. She's devoted more than 30 years to the Connecticut Department of Children and Families and mentors future professionals in the human services field. We want to welcome and are very honored to have Jackie Ford on our Desmond's Army podcast. Let us bring her on. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, Zilla.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Jackie, why don't you start with telling us about your book and why you felt that it was an important message to communicate to young people about young people?
Yeah, Matt. So thank you for the introduction too. I have been in the child welfare arena for almost 34 years now. And I have seen the correlation of the link that we speak about, and Desmond's Army does such a great job at educating the community about this link. But I saw a lot in my years of being in home environments and seeing that correlation between abusing a child and abusing an animal. So I wrote this book for a few different reasons. It was definitely a heart-led project that I started several years ago and just was published this month on April 1st. But I wanted to have a resource for children, to have an outlet to be able to identify a safe person in their life that they can share with if something is not right in the home, whether it's they're being abused or neglected or an animal in their home that they love dearly and desperately is being abused or neglected. So the book was written from a very tender approach to not scare a child into having that courage to tell, to identify people in their lives that they feel safe to share this information with. So the story is about 2 little girls who become fast friends, new neighbors to one another. And one friend named Rebecca can see that there's something just not quite right in the home where Addie lives. And Addie makes a disclosure that, her dad has been angry and not treating her and her mom or their dog Lily very well. So Addie and Rebecca work together to get the help that she needs. And I introduce in the book, how the DCF social worker comes over and meets with the family, and how the animal control officer meets together with the family as well as the veterinarian, and resources are put in place so that the dad can address the issues that, is creating the issues in the home for him and the stressors. So the book is really written. I made sure that before I published, I had shared that with several people just to make sure that I was on point with the storyline and also with elementary school teachers to make sure it wasn't too scary, because I don't want the book to be a scary book. I want it to empower kids and give children a voice when they feel like something is not right in their home. And I hope I've done that by creating this resource. The book also has educational information in the back that talks about the cross-reporting laws and Phil's work in the link. And what, Desmond's Army is mentioned in that book, as well as are some of the other animal control officers and rescues, because it speaks to all of the work collaboratively that's being done to impact this issue. So, I really hope that the book becomes a tool for, like you mentioned, Matt, for, police officers and animal control officers. But I think that the school system and the teachers is where this book is going to be extremely helpful, because it's going to spark conversation. It's going to empower kids' voices. And I've also developed tools and an art-based project that goes along with the book. So I think that it could really be a useful tool for educators.
My wife is a third grade teacher. I've already told her about this book, and she's going to read it to her students. She's really excited about it.
Thank you.
What was the genesis of this idea for you, Jackie? I mean, obviously you work at DCF. Your background is in social work. You have a family of your own. But I mean, it's a story, it's a fictitious story, but this could very easily be, and so often is, real life for so many young families in Connecticut, right?
Yeah, it is. I was fortunate to have been raised by my mom and my grandparents with animals. I mean, animals were always just so valued in our home. I couldn't imagine not having the love of an animal or giving that love to an animal. So it was very natural for me. And I'm a rescuer. I've had my share of rescuing many animals of all different shapes and sizes. So that's just in me, and my love for children and my protection of children as well. So I wrote this book because of all that I've learned from role models. And, Zilla is absolutely one of them. But from all the people doing the really hard work, I thought, what about a book that can be introduced to children at a young age? Because the book is primarily for K through 5 or K through 6, so that children are seeing that this problem can exist, and it may exist in other homes, and that they can have the courage to find the helpers in their life to be able to tell that story too. So I just wanted to have a way to speak to the children, because oftentimes, you can't speak to a child about this until you know that it's happening. But if you can have this book be read to a child, and maybe it's happening in their home, or maybe it's happening in a neighbor's home, or they just want to learn more about it, they can be our little messengers as well to this work happening. And, at a press conference that I was recently at, I know that your vice president spoke, Linda, and she talked about how animals don't always show their bruises. And, that was profound to me, because you don't always see that an animal's being abused or neglected. And in this book that I wrote, it's a kind of a window into abuse or neglect of an animal. This is more of a neglect situation than an abuse situation, because again, I wanted the story not to be scary. So I wrote this book because of my years of experience and firsthand experience in homes where animals needed to be removed because they were being abused or neglected at the same time a child was. And the cross-reporting work and the data all suggest that there is a profound correlation between the abuse of a child and an animal across the country, across the world.
So Zilla, maybe that's a good place for you to jump in. I mean, Desmond's Army has done reports and studies, which I know people can find on our website. And what are some of those data points for the link?
The link is that domestic violence and animal cruelty, you will find it's 87 percentile in homes with domestic violence. The animal is also being abused. So, it's significant. It's significant. And the kids need to be taught at an early age that, animal cruelty is not acceptable, and it needs to be reported, and they have a safe space to report it.
And, we were just talking, Zilla, about Mike Gurchie. And for the people who've been following that case, there's a video that was circulating where his kids were in the living room with those dogs, and you see the kids being
right.
Pretty
those
rough.
are not his children, but they were in the home, and I don't believe those were his children. I believe those were his girlfriend's children, but they were seen hitting the dog, and they learned it. It's a learned behavior. Kids aren't going to go and hurt something arbitrarily,
And they're
and
sponges. I mean,
they
I
are
can tell you
absolute sponges.
my two young boys, you repeat something that you shouldn't repeat, and all of a sudden your little kid is saying it. So, and Jackie, so I guess that's where I really want to applaud you seriously, because so often messaging in this space is targeting adults, right? Because we are adults, and it's easier we communicate in a way that resonates with adults. But what you are doing is you're filling a void that's much needed by targeting your messaging to children in an appropriate way, in a sensitive way, while they're young. And one thing really resonated with me that you said in one of your answers was the word helpers, right? So who are some of these helpers that young people have in their lives?
Yeah, and that's why with this book, and how, your audience, if they purchase the book, will see how it ends, is it ends in a very positive way, not necessarily happily ever after, but in a positive way, that making this disclosure, a child making a disclosure that something's not right in the home, does not have to lead to a child being removed or the animal being removed. It could, the helpers that are involved who are assessing and implementing supports and services can make that difference. And there are subtle ways even in the book where you'll see that, the dog didn't have any water. And the friend next door, Rebecca, helps her fill the water. So she's teaching her. So there's subtle ways of the child, in a way, neglecting the dog, but not purposefully, but just a way of teaching that child that this dog needs water. So the helpers in the book that I identified were the DCF social worker who's coming over to make sure that the child is safe. And then that illustration is at a family table and they're all talking. So it feels safe, and it's not as a frightening experience as often DCF is depicted in the media. And then we talk about the animal control officer coming over and sitting with the family in the living room and talking about, how important this dog is and how we need to make sure that its needs are being met. And then we visit the veterinarian, and the veterinarian is giving the dog the medicines that the dog needs. She needs to be able to be safe and comfortable. So the helpers in this book are definitely the adults, the neighbors that live next door, the social worker, the animal control officer, and the veterinarian, I would say, would be the helpers that are identified in my story.
There's a quote that you put out a press release when you put out your book, and one of the quotes that you put in here is, "Sometimes the bravest thing a child can do is tell." And I think that is so true. So, what you just mentioned, DCF, there's a depiction sometimes of if somebody speaks out, they're going to show up, they're going to remove that child from the home, separate him from the parents. You're never going to see him. There's just so much fear mongering that's really not true surrounding what goes on. Talk about how it is okay for a young person to speak up and speak out.
It is okay, and it is brave. And I think that, the depiction is either, the child is taken from the home and the home is disrupted, or the other depiction is DCF comes in and nothing is done. So I think that this story lends to the fact that a social worker does come in and they meet with the family and nobody's in trouble. I think, one of the biggest fears that a child could have is the unknown, not being brave enough to speak up because they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble for doing so. And by sharing with a friend, and that friend knowing what is right and what is wrong, and bringing their own parent into the situation and having help, implemented into that home with the resources available, I would hope that the story will make children feel comfortable to be brave and to make that disclosure, whether it's to a helper, which is an adult, or to a trusted friend.
Yep. And then, so what's the support framework like in the real world? I mean, if somebody is experiencing an issue, they want to speak up, they don't know who to turn to, what advice or suggestions do you have for them on next steps?
My advice would be to call the Department of Children and Families hotline, and make a report and let DCF assess and take the steps necessary to ensure the safety of the child in that situation. And if an animal is involved, to make a report to the State Department of Agriculture, your local animal control officer, so that we could, the Department of Children and Families could investigate that matter together to ensure that both are safe in the home. And, having been, with the Department of Children and Families for, like I said, over 3 decades, I really was raised within the department, as a young social worker ready to save the world. But, I've lost so much. I've learned so much through my experience at DCF. And although this book is independent of my work at the agency, I have seen the department make extreme improvements and collaborating with sister agencies to make sure that all the vulnerable populations in our society, in our state of Connecticut, are safe, and doing the best that they can with awareness and education. And that effort with the animal control officers is significant. Having been with the department for as long as I have, I worked before we had that partnership. And we didn't necessarily have anyone to call. And me being this crazy animal advocate and being in a home and seeing an animal being treated in a way that it shouldn't, you say, okay, what town am I in? Should I, call the animal control officer? What is their euthanize? Do they euthanize if they remove an animal from the home and nobody wants that animal? All those things are going through your mind to be able to best make that assessment for that animal. And I'm not in the home for the animal. I'm in the home for child protection. So now, we're mandated as social workers with the Department of Children and Families to make that call and to further assess that, whether you're an animal lover, advocate or not, that you have a moral obligation to make a report if you feel an animal is not being treated appropriately.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that important collaboration, Zilla, with our animal control officers across the state?
Yeah, this is really made leaps and bounds in the past few years. It took a while to get off the ground. Do you agree, Jackie?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And
we still have a long way to go, but we're getting there.
Right. But I know there's been several cases where the cross-reporting law is working very well, where animal control officers are going into the home. And if an animal is being neglected or abused, they are reporting to DCF. And vice versa. And I can't remember exactly how the law is written, but is it written that DCF is mandated to report to animal control?
Yes. Yeah. So from what I understand, animal control officers are not mandated reporters for child abuse and neglect. So it's a moral obligation to make the report, but we have a partnership with the agency. Yeah. So we're mandated. Years ago, if you were a DCF social worker going into a home and you weren't comfortable with animals, you could ask for the animals to be put in the other room until you were done with your assessment and investigation. So I think, we have come a very long way in educating our own staff, through Diane, who recently just retired from our department. She started the pause program, and she really worked tirelessly to make sure that our DCF staff are trained, that there are liaisons in all of the area offices that are doing this work in the community to ensure that, both children and animals are safe.
Cross-reporting is so important because, there's so many stakeholders and agencies, and, it's like playing the game of telephone, with the tin can and the string. It never ends up the same when it goes through multiple people. Something always changes. So clear, collaborative communication is really important. So we have, we talked about at the beginning, it's both Child Abuse Prevention Month and Animal Cruelty Awareness Month. And there was an event that was held just a few days ago where we had our Desmond's Army Vice President, Linda Pleva, speak. And a bunch of our members were there, of course, in the purple. And we were so happy to stand alongside both DCF and Department of Agriculture. The Lieutenant Governor was there just to put a spotlight on this, right? Because it is so important to have this collaboration. You can hear it from Desmond's Army all the time, but then to have the collaboration of hearing it from the state agencies, the nonprofits, all the advocates, we're really working together on this, aren't we, Zilla?
Yeah, the collaboration is so important, that we have that open communication, because without that, where are we in educating the public on this so important subject?
Jackie, so where can people get your book? And I know you have a event coming up, which we want to tell people about, right? Talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So you can purchase my book on Amazon, or you can visit my website, which is jacquelineford.us. And on my website, it shows where I'll be for book signings and opportunities to purchase the book. I'll be at Barnes & Noble and also doing story hour and a craft with my book and reading the book to any children that come to those book signings. So all those dates and times are on my website. There is an event coming up this Saturday. I'll be in Danbury. It's Independent Bookstore Day across the state. So I was included in a private bookstore that is in Danbury. And the actual title of that bookstore, the name of it is called The Booksmith in Danbury. So I'll be there at 12 noon on Saturday, signing my book and sharing the story with all the visitors to the store.
Amazing. Amazing. That's a great opportunity. Yeah. Hardcover and paperback, or just...
Right now, my dream is to get it in hardcover. Right now, it's in paperback.
And I know I see it kind of behind you, but I think you have another full page printout, right?
Yep. This is the book. It's 8.5 by 11 size. And I have a pop-up banner behind me and the tablecloth and all that good stuff for my first rodeo and having a book signing. A lot goes into it. But I think, the story, of course, is important. But I think that the information in the back of the book about the cross-reporting laws and all of the stakeholders and those that really came to the table to make this work happen. Renee Danino is a big advocate for animals and using all of her platforms and her audiences to share that. I think the biggest thing that we all do collaboratively and why it was so important rather than working in silos, because in all those silos, a lot of good work was happening, but now we're all working together. And I think education is an awareness is the most important thing that we can do and create within our schools, within all adult populations, because sometimes when you do this work, it's just second nature to you to understand the link and the vulnerability. And it's almost, when you have these conversations and someone says, oh, I didn't know, even I teach a course, and when I was cleaning up and leaving the classroom that I use, a professor was coming in and he happened to be a judge. And we got on the conversation of pets and animals and the link. And he said he had no idea. So I think that we have that work to do together to inform, our judges and our prosecutors in and out of family court, everywhere. Anyone who will listen to say that there is this documented, profound link between animal cruelty and the abuse of children and elderly, vulnerable populations of people, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, where animals are used as threats and to harm and to punish. I think we all that education piece is significant. And I hope that my book will help to educate children and giving them a voice, as well as the people that are reading this story to the children.
It's astounding how many people don't know, especially those in positions, like you said, a judge. You would think that they would be aware of this link. There's police officers that aren't aware. It's really astounding, when you get to talking to people and they don't know.
Even when someone is aware of maybe a youth who's abusing an animal, and in referencing the case that you just spoke about, where that man was arrested and he's being held right now. Sometimes people look at a youth who's abusing an animal and they may take the proper steps in informing the authorities or getting that child help. But you have to understand that even a correlation to abusing an animal starts somewhere, whether that child was abused or neglected or bore witness to other animals being abused or neglected. It's a learned behavior. It's a pattern.
Right.
And I know even the school shooters and the high, percentage rate of the school shooters that have history of abusing an animal or maybe finding joy just in pulling the wings off of a bug. And that brought them some sort of joy. And those are all the warning signals, the signs, the symptoms of someone who needs profound help. And if we can get that help for a child at a young age, we can change the trajectory of what's happening in our communities, because the data is there. And I think the more that we educate, our police officers, animal control officers, teachers, that if a child acts in a certain way, there's a correlation between that link of abuse and neglect of a child and an animal.
But Jackie, what I wanted to ask you, what do you do to make the schools aware? I imagine that you could probably partner in some way with the State Department of Education. One thing that I'm learning in some of the other work that I'm doing is education in Connecticut Connecticut is chronically underfunded, and social workers are getting cut left and right. So how do you get this message into the schools and make them aware?
Yeah, and that was my plan, is to reach out to either the Department of Education or superintendents that I know, and trying to get that, message across to them, that I have this tool and I have this resource of the book as a tool, as well as tools to go along with the book that can help process. Because even though the book is not frightening, the message is heavy. I mean, it's a heavy messaging behind this book. And I want educators to understand that when they read this book, what may happen after. You may have several children raising their hands to say what they have seen in their own homes or what they see in the neighborhood, and, what to do with that information. You have all of this information, and I think it's going to be a tag team approach with a school social worker and in that school to say, okay, I'm going to read this book, and this may elicit some responses from the kids. What do I do with this information? Who do I call? So that we can make sure that the kids are safe and the animals are safe in the disclosures that may be made. Then for those children who have not had an experience of born witness to that they have an activity that they can do to identify the helpers in their life if in the future they should have a situation, whether it involves animals or just personally, that they can talk to and identify who their helpers are in their circle. So I'm, like I said, I published on April 1st. I'm trying to get the word out to our community about this book and about the resource in any way that I can, and talk about it. I'm very, very passionate about it. I believe in this more than anything. The safety of animals and children are my purpose and my passion. So I welcome any opportunities to have, like I am right now with you and Zilla, and to have any audience that I can talk to about this book.
Oh, Jackie, we go into schools. We've been invited several times to talk about this. And maybe what we should do is bring your book with us.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's a great thing to do. We're talking about going into the New Haven school system. We've been invited.
That's wonderful.
I will let Linda know.
Okay.
And because she's usually the one that does that. And, we have some members that will do it also. We also have a couple of members that are school teachers. So
that would be wonderful.
Let's get that out there.
Yeah, I'll give you, the book to bring with you so that, they can see and they can be in touch with me to work on the tools or the next steps for the book. That's a great way to get it out there. I'm not looking, this is not $1 million maker. I didn't even think about all of that when I was making this book. It's really about getting this book in the hands of the educators and the people who can help stop, the cycle of abuse and neglect in our family.
Could I book you, Jackie, to read it to my wife's class?
Yes, I would love to. I would absolutely love to. What school system is she in?
Correct. And with the magnet school.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I would be honored. And those are great schools, and they they could greatly benefit from a little extra knowledge about this link.
Absolutely. And so I guess lastly, what is the reception been? I mean, this is a recent venture of yours, but you've been showing it to people and trying to get the word out there. And I imagine the response has been overwhelmingly positive.
It has been. The book has been selling on Amazon. I've been getting some great reviews, which is I'm just so overwhelmed with gratitude for the kind things that are being said about the book. People sending me pictures that they're reading it to their little ones, and it's been an overwhelming response. And I want it to keep going. I just want more and more people to be aware of the book so that we can make a difference.
Awesome. Well, we wish you all the luck in the world. We're honored to have you on our podcast today as a guest. And of course, as you know, Desmond's Army is always here to collaborate with you on whatever you need. So we appreciate you coming on, Jackie.
Thank you so much,
I'm honored
Jackie.
to be here. Thank you.
And so Zilla, anything else you want to add just to wrap it up here, or?
Stay tuned for more cases coming in.
There's a lot of stuff that we can't say now, right?
Yeah, that's the problem. Is there are quite a number of cases coming in, and later today, which this will air in a couple of days, but by then people will know more about the Gertrude case, possibly where the dogs are. It's our hope that a verified petition is being filed today to gain custody for those dogs, Stitch and Thor, and they'll be kept safe.
Good. That does it for episode 8 of the Desmond's Army podcast, all things animal advocacy. We appreciate you tuning in. As always, just as a reminder, you can email us and give us your feedback at desmondspodcast@gmail.com. Find us on all those platforms. Wherever you get your podcasts, we're streaming everywhere. We'll be back again soon with a new guest, a new topic for episode 9. But we certainly appreciate you tuning in and listening. And thank you so much for your support of Desmond's Army Animal Law Advocates. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.